Daniel Carter's boots clicked against the metal floor of the diplomatic hub, a sprawling station nestled within the neutral zone of Sector 9. He wasn't supposed to be here. Not now, at least. This assignment had originally gone to one of Earth's top negotiators, but a last-minute illness had left him filling in. Now, he stood at the edge of a wide observation deck, staring out at a busy docking bay where ships from half a dozen civilizations buzzed like restless insects. "Carter," a voice barked behind him. He turned to see Lieutenant Jonas Earhart, a stocky man with a perpetually furrowed brow, striding toward him. Jonas had been Daniel's friend since their academy days, and though he was technically stationed here as a logistics officer, his casual demeanor and constant need to be involved often made him a self-appointed aide to Daniel's diplomatic missions. "You're early," Daniel said, shaking Jonas's hand. "I like to see how the sausage gets made," Jonas quipped, then gestured toward the bay. "You know what that is?" Daniel followed his friend's gaze. A massive Thane warship had just docked, its angular hull gleaming under the station's lights. The Thane, known for their rigid warrior culture, rarely left their home territories except for highly formalized diplomatic meetings. "Thane flagship," Daniel said. "Looks like they're envoys here." "Envoy?" Jonas raised a brow. "Try ambassador in training. Just got the briefing, apparently their old rep got reassigned last minute. This new one's fresh out of whatever hellish school the Thane call diplomatic training." "Perfect," Daniel muttered, rubbing the back of his neck. Nothing like dealing with a rookie from a race that practically worships aggression. Jonas smirked. "Well, I'm here to watch you work your magic. Or to laugh when it all goes sideways." Daniel sighed. "Thanks for the support, Jonas." They both turned as a group of station officers approached, flanking a tall, armored figure. Even without the ceremonial garb, there would have been no mistaking her for human. Her silver skin shimmered faintly under the station's fluorescent lighting, and her eyes, a sharp, piercing green, seemed to take in every detail of her surroundings with calculated precision. She was young for a Thane, at least, though it was hard to tell exactly how old. "This is Athenia," said one of the officers, gesturing to the newcomer. "She'll be representing the Thane for this negotiation cycle." "Daniel Carter," Daniel said, stepping forward. He extended his hand but stopped midway, remembering that the Thane rarely engaged in casual physical contact. He gave a small nod instead. "I'm the acting human envoy for these proceedings. And this is Lieutenant Jonas Earhart." Athenia returned his nod, her expression unreadable. "I was told I would be meeting an experienced envoy." Daniel winced inwardly. "That was the original plan," he admitted. "Unfortunately, I was called in on short notice. But I assure you, I've been fully briefed and am prepared to work with you." Her gaze lingered on him for a moment as if weighing the truth of his words. Then she gave a curt nod. "Very well. Why don't we sit down and go over the agenda?" Daniel suggested. "Get a feel for each other's approach before the official talks begin." Athenia hesitated, then inclined her head. "Lead the way." As they moved through the station's sleek, brightly lit corridors, Jonas fell into step beside Daniel, lowering his voice. "Friendly bunch, aren't they?" "Let's not antagonize her," Daniel whispered back. "The Thane aren't known for their patience." They reached a small conference room. Daniel pulled out a chair for Athenia, who eyed it briefly before sitting down as if unsure what to make of the gesture. He took a seat across from her, Jonas sliding in next to him. "Why did the previous envoy leave so suddenly?" Daniel asked, his tone carefully neutral. Athenia's expression remained impassive. "It was a reassignment. Beyond that, I am not privy to the details." Jonas leaned forward slightly. "Must be a bit nerve-wracking, huh? Jumping into these talks at the last minute." Athenia turned her sharp gaze on him. "Thane do not experience fear as you do, human. I am here to perform my duty." Jonas raised his hands in mock surrender. "Understood." Daniel quickly redirected the conversation. "Let's focus on the immediate agenda. I believe today's main discussion involves resource distribution along the border planets." Athenia nodded. "The Thane delegation has already prepared its initial stance. We will present our demands clearly. I trust the human delegation will do the same." Her words were measured, but Daniel detected a faint undercurrent of uncertainty. He'd studied the Thane extensively, and while their military discipline was legendary, their diplomatic efforts were still relatively new. Athenia's formal tone and careful phrasing suggested she was reciting what she'd been taught rather than speaking from experience. "Perhaps," Daniel said slowly, "we can approach this not as demands, but as a search for mutual benefit. The human delegation is open to understanding the Thane's needs and finding common ground." Athenia tilted her head slightly. "A search for mutual benefit?" "It means," Daniel explained, "we look for outcomes that help both sides, not just one." That way, the agreement lasts longer and both parties feel invested in it. She considered this an unusual perspective. The Thane are accustomed to strength and clarity, not compromise. Strength and clarity have their place, Daniel agreed. But so does collaboration. Sometimes working together can achieve more than going it alone. Athenia's piercing eyes studied him closely. You speak as if you have done this many times. Jonas snorted. He's practically a legend back on Earth. Daniel shot Jonas a warning glance. I've had some experience, he said diplomatically. But every situation is unique. I'm here to learn as much as to negotiate. The faintest flicker of a smile tugged at Athenia's lips, so brief Daniel wondered if he'd imagined it. Very well, Daniel Carter. Let us proceed. They spent the next several hours reviewing protocols, discussing negotiation techniques, and preparing their opening statements. As they worked, Daniel noticed Athenia's demeanor shift. She remained formal, but her answers grew less rehearsed, her questions more direct. By the time they finished, she no longer seemed quite so detached. As they stepped out of the conference room, Jonas clapped Daniel on the back. Well, that wasn't a complete disaster. She didn't stab anyone. Athenia raised an eyebrow. That would be highly unprofessional. Jonas grinned. See? She's got a sense of humor. Daniel shook his head. Let's just hope the actual negotiations go as smoothly. Athenia looked at him, her expression unreadable again. If you truly believe that, Daniel Carter, you are more optimistic than I anticipated. With that, she turned and walked off toward her quarters, leaving Daniel and Jonas alone in the corridor. Jonas watched her go, then looked at Daniel. Well, she's not boring. I'll give her that. Daniel didn't answer right away. He was already thinking about their next meeting and how he could help her navigate the complex, often baffling world of interspecies diplomacy. Something about her, the blend of strength and hesitation, the way she carried herself like a soldier but spoke like someone trying to learn a new language, made him want to see what was beneath that polished exterior. Come on, Daniel said finally. Let's get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. Jonas shrugged. If you say so, boss. As they walked back to their quarters, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that this mission was going to be more than just another round of diplomatic talks. It was the start of something different, something he couldn't quite define yet. The station's negotiation chamber was as sterile and functional as Daniel remembered. Dull steel walls framed the wide, circular table at its center, surrounded by chairs that rarely offered comfort to any species. It was a setting designed for efficiency, not pleasantries. Jonas Earhart leaned casually against the back wall, arms folded, as Daniel and Athenia sat opposite each other at the table. Daniel had cleared his schedule to give Athenia the time she needed to prepare for the upcoming talks. Despite her training, it was clear she had little experience with the subtle human art of persuasion. All right, Daniel began, folding his hands on the table. Why don't we start with the basics? Can you tell me what approach you're planning to take with the Panricians tomorrow? Athenia's silver-gray brow furrowed slightly. The Thane have determined that the Panrician trade demands are unreasonable. Our strategy is to firmly assert our position, demonstrate the weakness in their argument, and insist on a revised set of terms. Jonas let out a low whistle from the corner. Sounds friendly. Daniel shot Jonas a warning glance before focusing on Athenia again. And what happens when they push back? Athenia straightened in her chair. Then we push harder. That's not going to work, Daniel said gently. The Panricians are stubborn. If they feel like they're being bullied, they'll just dig in their heels and refuse to budge. Athenia's green eyes narrowed slightly, her tone edged with challenge. What would you suggest, then, Daniel Carter? Give them a reason to want the deal, he replied. Start by acknowledging their concerns. Show them you understand their position, even if you don't agree with it. Then guide the conversation toward a middle ground that benefits both sides. She tilted her head, clearly skeptical. You suggest we show weakness? No, Daniel said quickly. Acknowledging their concerns isn't weakness. It's strategy. If they believe you respect their point of view, they're more likely to listen to yours. Athenia regarded him for a long moment, as if weighing the validity of his words. This is not the Thane way. No, it's not, he said. But you're not just representing the Thane right now. You're negotiating with other civilizations, each with their own ways of thinking. Adapting to that isn't a betrayal of your people's values. It's the first step toward success. She looked down at her hands, the sleek silver skin on her fingers reflecting the chamber's cold light. For a moment, Daniel thought she might argue again. But when she met his gaze, her voice was quieter. Show me. What? This technique you speak of. Show me how it works. Daniel leaned back slightly, thinking. Then he smiled. All right, let's say I'm a Pan-Rician delegate. You want me to reduce the tariff on your exports. How would you start the conversation? Athenia sat up straight, her tone formal and sharp. Your tariffs are damaging to our trade and unacceptable to the Thane. We demand they be reduced. Jonas snorted from the corner. Sure, that'll win them over. Daniel held up a hand to silence him. Okay, that's one way to start. But now imagine I'm a Pan-Rician and I say, your exports are flooding our markets and undermining our local industries. We can't lower the tariffs. What would you do next? Athenia's expression tightened. I would argue that our exports provide goods of superior quality and benefit their consumers. And if they respond that their industries can't compete with your superior quality? Daniel asked. She hesitated. I would insist that the Thane have the right to free trade. Daniel shook his head. See? That's where you lose them. Insisting on what you want without addressing their concerns just puts them on the defensive. Athenia frowned. Then what would you say? Something like this, Daniel said, sitting up. I understand that your local industries are struggling to compete, and I sympathize with the challenges your economy faces. However, I believe we can work together to find a solution that ensures both your industries and our trade partners thrive. For example, we could look into cooperative manufacturing agreements or technology sharing to bolster your local businesses, while still allowing us to maintain fair trade terms. Athenia's eyes narrowed slightly as she processed his words. You acknowledge their concerns and offer a solution that benefits them as well. Exactly, Daniel said. It's not about giving up what you want. It's about showing them that they'll gain something too. That's unusual, Athenia admitted, her voice softening. In Thane negotiations, such an approach might be seen as appeasement. Jonas stepped forward, leaning on the table. Or it could be seen as smart. Look, Thane are warriors, right? You know how to pick your battles. Diplomacy is just a different kind of battle. One you win by keeping everyone at the table long enough to agree on something. Athenia glanced between Daniel and Jonas, clearly weighing their words. This method, she said at last, requires a level of patience and flexibility that is not typically encouraged in our training. Good thing you've got us, Jonas said, flashing a grin. Daniel nodded. We can practice as much as you need before tomorrow's session. The more comfortable you get with this approach, the easier it will be to use it when it counts. Athenia's gaze lingered on Daniel for a moment. Then she gave a single, firm nod. Very well. Let us practice. They spent the next 2 hours running through scenarios, with Daniel playing the part of a Pan-Rician delegate and Athenia honing her responses. At first, her attempts were stiff and unconvincing, but Daniel noticed small improvements with each iteration. Her tone became less combative, her phrasing more thoughtful. By the time they wrapped up, she seemed to have grasped the basic idea. You're getting it, Daniel said, smiling. You just need to keep that balance. Assertive but cooperative. Athenia tilted her head slightly. This approach is not unpleasant. I can see its potential. High praise from a Thane, Jonas quipped. Maybe we won't all be at each other's throats after all. Athenia's lips twitched upward ever so slightly, almost like a smile. Come on, Daniel said, standing and stretching. Let's call it a day. We'll go over a few more strategies in the morning before the talks start. Athenia rose as well, her movements smooth and precise. Thank you, Daniel Carter. Your methods are unconventional, but I am beginning to understand their value. Daniel nodded, feeling a strange sense of satisfaction. I'll see you tomorrow, then. As Athenia left the chamber, Jonas gave Daniel a knowing look. You really think she's going to pull it off? I think, Daniel said, she's starting to see that diplomacy isn't just about force, it's about understanding the other side. If she can hold on to that, she'll do fine. Jonas clapped him on the shoulder. You've got a lot of faith in people, Carter. I hope she proves you right. Daniel shrugged. So do I. They headed out together, leaving the chamber behind. The station's arboretum wasn't much, just a collection of synthetic trees and carefully arranged plants set under a wide, domed ceiling. A faint hum from the climate regulators was the only sound. For most residents, it was a quiet escape, a place to decompress after long negotiations. For Daniel, it was his go-to spot when he needed to think, and he'd brought Athenia here to try something entirely different. "So what exactly are we doing here?" Athenia asked, her voice carrying that same sharp, curious tone he was getting used to. She stood stiffly, arms crossed, gazing at the low-hanging branches of a tree that looked almost like a willow. "We're taking a break," Daniel said. "Sometimes you have to step away from the conference table and just breathe." Athenia turned her piercing green eyes on him. "Breathe?" He smiled. "Figure of speech. I mean, we need to loosen up. Clear our heads." Athenia regarded him for a moment, then nodded curtly. "Very well. What do you suggest we do while we loosen up?" "Dancing." She blinked. "Dancing?" "You know," Daniel said, setting his portable comm unit on a nearby bench. "Moving to music. Expressing yourself. It's not something you learn in a strategy session. It's about letting go for a moment, just enjoying the rhythm." Athenia looked at the comm unit as if it might sprout legs. "And you believe this? Dancing will make me a better negotiator?" "It'll help you relax," he said. "And who knows? It might even be fun." Jonas strolled into the arboretum then, his hands shoved into the pockets of his uniform. Wait, hold on. You're teaching her to dance? Now I've got to see this." Daniel shot him a look. "Jonas, can't you find something else to do?" "Not a chance," Jonas said, leaning casually against a tree trunk. "This is the highlight of my week." Daniel sighed and turned back to Athenia. "Ignore him. Come on, let's start." He tapped a button on the comm unit and soft music began to play, an old earth melody, slow and simple, something he thought wouldn't intimidate her. Athenia stood still, her arms at her sides, watching him like he was demonstrating a combat drill. "Just follow my lead," Daniel said. He stepped closer, offering his hand. She hesitated before taking it, her touch cool and light. "Okay," Daniel said. "First step, move your right foot back, like this." Athenia mirrored his step, though her movement was sharp, more like a military maneuver than a casual dance step. "Relax," Daniel encouraged. "This isn't a battlefield. Just let the music guide you." "I am unaccustomed to such informal activities," she said. Jonas chuckled from his spot by the tree. "Yeah, we can tell." "Jonas," Daniel said sharply. "If you're going to be here, at least try to be helpful." "Fine," Jonas said, still grinning. "I'll shut up. For now." Daniel turned back to Athenia. "Okay. Let's try a few more steps. Just keep moving with me. Forward, back, side to side. Feel the rhythm." She followed his lead again, this time less rigidly. Her movements still had a deliberate quality, but she was starting to relax. Daniel noticed her expression soften slightly. "This is unusual," she said after a moment. "You're doing fine," he said. "Better than fine. You're getting it." Athenia tilted her head, her gaze searching his face. "Do you do this often? Dancing?" "Not as much as I'd like," he admitted. "It's something I grew up with. Back on Earth, it's a big part of our culture. Celebrations, weddings, even just gatherings of friends. There's always music and dancing." "I have never witnessed such a thing," she said. "In Thane culture, we train for precision, for victory. There is no room for frivolity." "Maybe that's why you find diplomacy so difficult," Daniel said gently. "It's not all about strategy and precision. Sometimes you have to connect on a different level. That's what dancing teaches you. It's not about who's right or wrong. It's about finding a rhythm together." Athenia seemed to consider his words carefully. "You believe that learning this dance will help me become a better diplomat?" "I think it's a step in the right direction," Daniel said. Jonas couldn't help himself. "A step in the right direction, really? You're making puns now." Daniel ignored him and focused on Athenia. "Let's keep going. Try to let yourself move naturally. Don't think about it too much. Just let go." They continued moving to the soft rhythm of the music. Slowly at the faintest hint of a smile on her lips. After a few more minutes, the music ended. Daniel stopped and took a step back. "So," he asked, "what do you think?" Athenia stood still for a moment, her hands at her sides. Then she looked at him. It was not unpleasant. Jonas laughed. That's high praise coming from her. "I'm glad you're enjoying this," Daniel said to Jonas, shaking his head. Hey, I'm just here for moral support, Jonas said, raising his hands. Besides, I think you actually got her to smile. That's worth something. Athenia glanced at Jonas. It is a strange activity, but it does require coordination and focus. Perhaps there is merit in it. Daniel grinned. See? You're already a natural. She arched an eyebrow at him, but there was no sharpness in her tone when she said, I am far from proficient. Well, that's what practice is for, Daniel said. Next time, we'll try something a little more challenging. Next time? Athenia asked. Of course, Daniel said. If you're up for it. She considered this for a moment, then nodded. Very well. I will practice this dance again. Great, Daniel said. Same time tomorrow? Agreed, she said, then turned and walked toward the Arboretum's exit. Jonas waited until she was gone before speaking. You know, I never thought I'd see a Thane learning to dance. What's next? Singing lessons? Let's not push it, Daniel said, chuckling. Jonas gave him a mock salute. Whatever you say, maestro. Daniel sighed but couldn't help smiling as he picked up his comm unit. Athenia might not have admitted it outright, but he could see it in her eyes. Something had shifted. Maybe, just maybe, this strange detour into music and movement would help her find the connection she needed to navigate the delicate world of diplomacy. He glanced at Jonas. Come on, let's get something to eat. Now you're talking, Jonas said, clapping him on the shoulder. As they left the Arboretum, Daniel couldn't help but feel a small flicker of optimism. There was still a long road ahead, but for the first time, he felt like they were moving in the right direction. The days aboard the diplomatic hub had started to fall into a familiar rhythm. The long sessions in the conference chambers, the post-meeting debriefs, and of course, those increasingly frequent trips to the Arboretum. Daniel found himself looking forward to them, though he didn't say it out loud. He wasn't sure if it was the change of pace, the quiet space, or Athenia's gradual transformation that drew him in. Maybe it was a combination of all three. You're getting better, Daniel said, as the soft notes of another earth melody filled the Arboretum. He led Athenia through a series of steps they'd practiced over the past few sessions. Better, she repeated, her green eyes focused on his movements. I still do not understand the purpose of these gestures. It's not always about purpose, Daniel replied. It's about expression. Communication without words. Jonas had tagged along again, though this time he was more of an observer than a commentator. He stood by one of the synthetic trees, arms crossed, a faint smirk on his face. Still hard to believe you're teaching a Thane to dance, Jonas said. What's next? Painting lessons. Athenia stopped mid-step and fixed him with her piercing gaze. Painting. Jonas raised an eyebrow. Never mind. Just stick with the dancing for now. Thank you, Jonas, Daniel said, rolling his eyes. Very helpful. Athenia turned her attention back to Daniel, her movements becoming smoother as they resumed the dance. Her steps were still deliberate, but there was a noticeable difference from when they'd started. She wasn't simply copying his motions anymore. She was beginning to feel the rhythm. See, Daniel said, smiling. You're moving with the music now. Perhaps, Athenia said. It is less difficult than it was before. High praise, Jonas said, grinning. Keep it up, Carter. Maybe she'll even admit she likes it one day. Athenia's eyes flicked to Jonas, then back to Daniel. Is this how humans express camaraderie? Through these comments? Pretty much, Daniel said. If Jonas is teasing you, it means he's comfortable around you. Interesting, she said. Thane camaraderie is expressed through shared challenges, combat exercises, survival tests. It is not as light-hearted as this. Daniel nodded. Every culture's different, but trust me, it's a good sign. Athenia paused, her head tilted slightly. And you? Are you comfortable around me? The question caught Daniel off guard. He hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Yeah, I am. Something in her expression shifted, subtle, but noticeable. She stepped a little closer, their hands brushing briefly as they continued the dance. The touch was light, unintentional, but it lingered in Daniel's mind. Jonas, still watching, gave an exaggerated cough. Don't mind me, just the chaperone over here. Jonas, can you give us a minute? Daniel asked, a hint of exasperation in his voice. Jonas smirked but straightened up. Sure thing, boss. I'll go find something productive to do. Try not to trip over each other. With that, he walked out of the Arboretum, leaving them alone. Athenia watched him leave, then turned back to Daniel. He is amusing. That's one word for it, Daniel said, shaking his head. Sorry about him. He doesn't know when to quit. I do not mind, Athenia said. It is interesting to observe human behavior. Daniel chuckled. Well, Jonas is certainly an interesting case. They fell into a comfortable silence for a moment, the music continuing to play softly in the background. Athenia's movements had become more fluid, and Daniel found himself thinking less about leading and more about following her rhythm. It was subtle, but she was beginning to guide him in her own way. You're starting to lead, he said, smiling. That's new. She looked at him, a small flicker of amusement in her expression. You said this was about finding a rhythm together. And you're doing it, Daniel said. You're finding your rhythm. They continued to move, their steps becoming almost instinctive. It wasn't just about learning anymore, it was about connection. The kind of connection that didn't need words. Daniel realized how close they'd gotten, how natural it felt to stand like this, to move like this. Athenia, he began, hesitating slightly. Yes. I know we've been working on this for a while now, and I've seen how you've changed. You're more comfortable, more open. I guess I'm just glad we're doing this together. She regarded him thoughtfully, her gaze steady. I did not expect to find value in these sessions. But you have shown me something different, something I did not know I needed. Daniel smiled. It's the same for me. There was another pause, and then, without planning or thinking, he leaned in slightly. Athenia didn't pull away. Instead, she tilted her head, her expression softening. Their faces were close now, close enough that Daniel could feel the warmth of her presence. It wasn't a sudden movement, but rather a natural shift and unspoken understanding. When their lips met, it was brief, tentative, but it sent a jolt through him that he hadn't expected. They both stepped back, the moment hanging in the air. That, Athenia said slowly, was not part of the dance. No, Daniel said, his voice quiet. It wasn't. She didn't seem upset or confused. If anything, she looked curious. Is this also a form of human expression? Something like that, he said, smiling faintly. Athenia nodded as if filing the experience away in her mind. I will have to consider this. Daniel wasn't sure what to say. The kiss had happened so naturally, yet now he felt unsure how to proceed. Fortunately, Athenia seemed content to let the silence stretch between them. The music continued to play, the soft melody filling the arboretum. Shall we continue? She asked after a moment. He smiled. Sure. Let's keep going. They resumed their steps, moving together in a quiet, unspoken rhythm. The atmosphere had shifted, but it wasn't awkward. If anything, it felt more connected. They didn't need words right now. The music, the movements, the quiet touch, these spoke louder than anything else. For the rest of the session, they danced without speaking, finding their rhythm once again. It was no longer about learning. It was simply about being in the moment. Daniel Carter leaned against the smooth railing of the Arboretum's observation deck, looking out at the star-filled expanse beyond the dome. The diplomatic hub seemed quieter than usual, though he knew the upcoming final talks were causing tensions to simmer in the background. Athenia would be arriving soon, and for once, it wasn't to practice negotiation techniques. It wasn't even for a dance lesson. It was just to be together. Stargazing. Jonas's familiar voice interrupted Daniel's thoughts. He turned to see his friend strolling into the arboretum, a bottle of water in hand. Something like that, Daniel said, smiling faintly. Jonas leaned on the railing beside him. You've been spending a lot of time in here lately. It's a good spot, Daniel said. Quiet, peaceful, and conveniently located for meeting certain alien diplomats, Jonas teased. Daniel shot him a look. Are you keeping tabs on me? Hard not to notice, Jonas said with a grin. You've been more relaxed lately. Happier. I'd say that's a good thing. Before Daniel could respond, the door at the far end of the arboretum slid open. Athenia stepped inside, her sleek, silver-hued skin catching the soft light of the artificial sun lamps. She wore the simple, flowing attire of her rank, a diplomatic uniform that was far less intimidating than the ceremonial armor she had first appeared in. Her piercing green eyes found Daniel immediately. Jonas glanced at Daniel, then back at Athenia. I should leave you two to it. You don't have to, Daniel started, but Jonas was already heading for the exit. Enjoy your stargazing, Jonas called over his shoulder, disappearing out the door. Daniel turned to Athenia as she approached. He's got great timing, doesn't he? Athenia tilted her head. He seems to enjoy creating situations for his own amusement. That's Jonas, Daniel said, gesturing for her to join him at the railing. Come on. The stars aren't going to admire themselves. Athenia stepped up beside him, her gaze following his out into the void. Do humans often spend time looking at the stars? Sometimes, Daniel said. It's humbling, you know? Reminds us how small we are in the grand scheme of things. The Thane view the stars differently, Athenia said. We see them as challenges, distant places to reach, to conquer, to master. Daniel glanced at her, intrigued. So every star is a goal for you? Not every star, Athenia said thoughtfully. But many. It is how we are taught to think. Daniel nodded slowly. Well, there's something to be said for ambition. Still, I think there's value in just appreciating them for what they are. No agenda. No conquest. Just beauty. Athenia didn't reply immediately. She seemed to be considering his words as she gazed at the vast expanse. Finally, she said, humans have a way of seeing the universe that is unexpected. Unexpected good or unexpected bad? Daniel asked, his tone light. Unexpected, she repeated, though there was a slight curve to her lips. They stood in companionable silence for a while, the stars twinkling outside the dome. Then Athenia shifted slightly closer to him, her arm brushing against his. What happens now? She asked quietly. Daniel glanced at her. With the negotiations, you mean? With everything, she said. When the talks are over. When the delegation returns to our homeworlds. It was a question Daniel hadn't let himself dwell on. He knew their time here was temporary. The Thane delegation would return to their territories and Daniel's assignment would eventually take him elsewhere. But that wasn't something he wanted to focus on now. I don't know, he admitted. We'll figure it out when the time comes. Athenia nodded, though her expression was unreadable. The Thane prefer to plan for every eventuality. To leave something uncertain is difficult. Daniel smiled faintly. Maybe this is another human lesson. Not everything has to be planned out. Sometimes you just have to let it happen. She looked at him, her piercing green eyes meeting his. You believe we will find a way? I do, Daniel said simply. We've come this far. Why stop now? Athenia's gaze lingered on him, and for a moment Daniel felt like the stars outside were dim compared to the intensity of her look. Then, to his surprise, she reached out and took his hand. This is not the Thane way, she said, her voice soft. But it is not unpleasant. Daniel squeezed her hand lightly. No, it's not. They stayed like that for a long time, the stars their only witnesses. Daniel couldn't predict what the future held for them, but in that moment it didn't matter. All that mattered was the connection they'd found and the rhythm they shared, one that needed no music, no agenda, and no words.